Mandel Center, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this ongoing series of conversations with scholars of Jewish education. We created this series as a way to share scholarship in the field of Jewish education with a broad audience of educators and Jewish leaders. At the Mandel Center, we are committed to developing and promoting scholarship in Jewish education, especially scholarship on teaching and learning in Jewish education, in order to make a deep and lasting difference on the lives of learners and the vibrancy of the Jewish community. That's our mission, and today's session and our other events help us to serve our mission by getting ideas out into the world. We encourage you to take a look at the Mandel Center events page to see the rest of our upcoming events. And we are delighted to see so many of you joining us live. We hope to be able to take some of your questions as we go, so please feel free to post those questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We are also recording today's session, and we'll make the recording available afterwards on our website and as a podcast for those who couldn't join us today. But the recording will only capture the presenters, and not the audience. Okay, our guest today is my friend and colleague, Dr. Anna Hartman. Anna has been a classroom teacher and director of early childhood programs. She founded the Paradigm Project, which is a network of people working in and on Jewish early childhood education. And she now serves as the director of Early Childhood Excellence at the Jewish United Fund of Chicago. She won a Covenant Award in 2021 for her outstanding work in Jewish education, among other awards, I should say. And last year, she was in our Doctoral Fellows program here at the Mandel Center as she worked on her doctorate at JTS, which in fact she completed last year, which was great. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, the research that went into her doctoral dissertation. Anna, welcome. It's good to see you.
Thanks, John. Likewise.
So we're talking about your doctoral research on children's theories about Judaism. And let's start with a little bit of the backstory. How did you decide that you wanted to study children's theories about Judaism? Obviously, from your bio, as I just mentioned a little bit, you've been involved in early childhood Jewish education for a long time. But how did you decide you want to study children's theories? And then tell us a little bit about your methodology. How did you undertake the study itself? Great.
Well, I'm really interested in how children think. I think I might be a person who's interested in how human beings think. But in particular, I know from my experience as an educator and as a parent that children really are, as so many of us know, really creative and fascinating thinkers. And something I do in my work is that I really want to listen in and get to know how these individuals think. I think that in Jewish education and in Jewish life in general, young children should be considered members of our community. And just like anyone, they have ideas and they have perspectives and they're worth knowing. And I continue to wonder what we might learn when we bring their voices into our conversations. So a little bit about how I did this work. I conducted this study during the pandemic. And the best way I was going to be able to really listen in classrooms was going to be through the children's teachers. I sought out and found 6 teachers in Jewish early childhood centers around the country to be part of my study. Each of these teachers was experienced in the Reggio Emilia approach, and each one had engaged with children in some kind of emergent investigation of a Jewish idea or topic. And the Reggio approach, which comes out of Italy, is a philosophy and a set of practices that many educators in the US utilize. But what's important for this study is that it involves teachers documenting an entire learning investigation. That's part of the process. So teachers who work using the Reggio approach regularly collect photographs and reflections from the children and the adults, and they capture conversations and the children's own words, often with really exact transcripts. Mm-hmm. Collected and I read the teacher's documentation. I interviewed each teacher. I coded the transcripts, coded any of the interviews, and coded any transcripts I had of children's original words. And then in my analysis, I used open codes so that I could develop a grounded theory of children's theories.
So in this case, Reggio Emilia, which is a pedagogy also serves as a really helpful tool for research. As you said, because of in other circumstances, you might have been able to actually visit the classrooms, gather data directly from the students, but you weren't able to do that. But through these collaborating teachers, you were able actually to get, indirectly, but still pretty close to the children's artifacts and even actually children's words that you were able to gather up. So they were really, these teachers were really like your research assistants, and through them you were getting to a whole group of kids. So let's think about the main argument from this research. I always want to ask scholars, sort of at the 30,000 foot level, what do you want people to know about children's theories about Judaism?
I want people to know that when children come into their classrooms, they already are bringing with them certain theories or certain approaches or mental models or ways that they understand things. And these theories really shape what the children can and will learn in the classroom. So when teachers listen to children and when they facilitate a Jewish education that is responsive to those theories that are coming in, children can emerge from these experiences with a new and really vital theory. And that theory is that they have a sense that they can make their mark on Judaism. In Jewish education, I feel like we're always talking about transmitting Judaism to the next generation. But what does that even mean? And what does it look like? And I think in this study, we can get the sense that children really are not passive receivers, but rather they're actively involved in receiving and charting a path forward for the Torah and for Judaism.
So when you think about the theories, right, and this is for folks outside this world, what do you mean that kids have theories? Well, kids actually have ideas. They have ideas about how the way the world works. Some of them are quite sophisticated. Some of them are sort of amusingly off, but still fascinating because that's the stuff that they're bringing with. And you're making the claim that the same thing goes about Judaism, about the nature of Judaism. So can you give us an example? What's an example of something that a child's theory about Judaism?
Well, do you want me to take you in? Maybe I can take you into one of these studies and we can talk a little bit about it. Does that work?
Sure.
So let me tell you a little bit about a teacher that we'll call Bailey. She's a teacher in the New York area. And you'll see sort of how children's learning is not dissimilar to the way we all learn in life. So Bailey and this class of 4-year-olds went on quite a learning journey. It involved weaving, it involved challah covers, and tzedakah. So a couple of important things contextually. So in advance, you should know that one of the children had a lemonade stand at her house, and the children made a lemonade stand at school, and they were just over the moon over this. Teachers also had attended a workshop about weaving and how to weave with children. And also contextually, this synagogue has a homeless shelter, and families each week bring in food for the homeless shelter. So soon as the year progressed, the children got into this weaving that teachers brought into school, and they set up shop as super weavers, and they were weaving challah covers, and they decided they would they would use the proceeds from selling them to buy clothing for the men in the shelter. So, but then something happened, that the class pencil holder broke, and the children worked with the teachers and tried to recreate the pencil holder using weavings that they had been creating. And then they realized, wait a minute, the weaving could have a purpose. And this was a big realization. And one day, as they were playing around, one of the children placed a weaving on top of the challah in the class on a Friday. And someone said, look, a challah cover.
A
moment is for, right? This is how it happens. And so in the months that followed, the children embarked on a study of challah covers. They wrote their own blessings for the challah. They had an advertising campaign to promote challah sales. And the project culminated in a trip to a department store where the children brought the items that the shelter managers had suggested would be important. And so all of this happens over the course of a year, and the teacher doesn't usually have time to really go back and say, well, what's really happening for the children here? But through the Reggio process of documentation, which both involves the collection and the discussion and the interpretation, the teacher has the opportunity to talk about it. So when we talked together, and I talked with Bailey, we were really trying to get at what do the children know? And what are they telling us? What is like behind and beneath everything that they're saying? And I'm going to tell you more as we go on about some of the things they had to say about tzedakah. But that's really what you're trying to get at, is what's beneath this? What do they already know about this idea of tzedakah? What's sticking? And how does that relate to, and how's that different from what they might think as an adult?
Right. So one of the things that I remember, one of the really charming things that I remember from that example in your work is there was an investigation that the children together with the teachers, there was an investigation of this idea of a challah cover. And rather than saying, there is a preset form of challah cover, in this kind of exploratory spirit, they were trying to figure out, well, what's a challah cover for? And one of the things that emerged from, I don't know how many students, at least one student, that a challah cover keeps the challah kind of warm and toasty and comfortable. And that that's really fascinating. I had never thought of a challah cover like a blanket. Right? And so this is like a micro theory. This isn't like a grand theory about all of Judaism. It's a micro theory that the child has, like in that child's imagination, the purpose of a challah cover is to, not that the child thinks that the challah is animate, but that at some level, there's an analogy. I like to be tucked in at bedtime, and I like to tuck the challah in with a warm or, comfy blanket. I remember comfy was part of the description.
Yes, and fluffy. Fluffy was the
fluffy.
That's exactly it. So what's going on in the child's mind? What are the 10 associations that they have? And actually, what a loving way of thinking about a ritual.
Right.
It's something that we care about. We want to make sure that they're fluffy. And the children asked the rabbi, is it a prerequisite, not in their words, does the challah cover have to be fluffy?
Fluffy.
Saw some examples. And is that important?
Right. And, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but it's a fascinating question to ask. Well, then what are the qualities? Right? What qualities do we want to have in a challah cover if we actually have some autonomy over creating our own challah covers? I want to encourage our listeners, if they want to use the Q&A function to submit questions. I'll try and circle back, and I'm monitoring the chat as we go, or the Q&A as we go. So along the way, you discovered in this work, among these students in these 6 locations, that there are 4 central themes. There are children's theories about Jewishness, about God, about Jewish ritual, and about tzedakah. Those were kind of 4 main themes that you noticed coming up kind of regularly across these settings. So I want to focus on their theories of Jewishness for a moment. Here's something that you wrote. You wrote, the children in this study seem to equate being Jewish with celebration and action. Being Jewish means that you celebrate Jewish holidays and Shabbat. They actually say things like this. So these are quotes from the kids. Jewish means you celebrate holidays, or Jewish means you get to have Shabbat. So this makes a lot of sense to me, and I can sort of imagine kids saying this. And then once I start to think about it, it's fascinating to me that by focusing on holidays, there's something else that they seem not to be saying. For example, they don't say that being Jewish, or at least in this, in what you have gathered, they don't say that being Jewish is part of, is about being part of a family or a nation, which is like a different conception of Jewishness. So first I just want to check, does that seem right to you from the data that you saw? And does your study suggest that, at least for these kids, that they think about being Jewish as doing rather than being in relationship?
So I have a few thoughts on this. The first is that this idea of seeing Judaism as action and celebration is very consistent with child development theory in general, right? This idea that through action, a young child develops a sense of who they are. So one of the wise teachers in this study said, there is no cognition without the tangible, without the hands-on. At these young stages, children are just getting a sense of the various circles in which they belong. They know their parents and their siblings, and eventually they get a sense, oh, beyond that, there's the classroom and my classmates and the larger school. And really only at age 4 do most children really conceive of the world beyond their own neighborhoods. So that conception grows and grows. And you're right, in terms of understanding Jewishness, this study does suggest that the idea of being Jewish as being part of a family or nation doesn't yet seem to be a part of children's theories of Judaism. And second, like people of any age, young children are making connections and meaning from their encounters. They may look back on their early childhood experience when they're older and say, wow, my formative years really fostered in me a sense of community, the sense that being Jewish is about being a part of a family. And there are definitely theories that are being crafted at this age that are just not yet fully formed or detectable. And third, while the children seem to have this idea of Judaism being about action and celebration, there's more to it because they're already on the cusp of a new theory that's more nuanced. So I'll give you an example. So there's a discussion in one of the classes about Hanukkah and Christmas. So if being Jewish means celebrating Jewish holidays, then it stands to reason that Jews celebrate Hanukkah and people who are not Jewish may celebrate Christmas. So this is how the children processed this, and these are all direct quotes. Jewish means you can't celebrate Christmas and you can celebrate Hanukkah. I'm a Jewish girl, even though I celebrate Christmas. When people are Jewish, they might celebrate Christmas, and some people might celebrate Hanukkah. My cousins are not Jewish and they celebrate Christmas. I celebrate Hanukkah and I'm Jewish too. I celebrate Hanukkah but not Christmas and I'm Jewish. And then I think this is the big punchline. One child says, you know something? Jews always celebrate Hanukkah, but not Jews, people who are not Jewish, never celebrate Hanukkah. And then another child says, some people celebrate Christmas, even though they are not Christmas people. Jewish people can have fun at Christmas.
It's like they're like working through the logical possibilities here. You can almost start to do the Venn diagram, and like they're trying to work it out. You hear the wheels turning, right? They're really trying to process this, and again, they are thinking primarily about practice. They're thinking about what you do, right? There is an idea that some people are what did they say? Christmas people, or right? Not Jews, Christmas people. So there is a identity component here, but it seems to be a component that's primarily expressed in terms of this thing that you do, particularly this very visible thing, which makes sense also in the American context that this is a very visible thing. I'm curious whether this showed up in other, from what you can remember, does it show up in other kinds of practices beyond the holidays?
You mean this nuance and this kind of the reasoning pieces?
Well, or the idea that what it means to be a Jew is to do X.
I'd have to go back. And what I want to say, I mean, thank you for being one of the very few readers of my dissertation. We need more research in this area. I mean, each of these areas, I noticed they were salient across at least 4 of my 6 schools that I worked with. And we need to get in and listen more because we need the transcripts. That's really the most important part, is to really look at it like a text. And I think that's something I would recommend as we come, in this webinar, this podcast today, that's something that teachers make time for that, and that schools enable them to make that time.
Right, that they document, that they record, that they keep the artifacts, that to give us the opportunity to actually for us to investigate the kids' thinking. A little bit of a departure. How do you think about? I'm sure you've considered the kind of methodological challenge. Well, so these are 6 classrooms, but do these patterns hold beyond these 6 classrooms? How do you think about that question?
I just think we need more research. I mean, one of my own advisors said to me, look, all you're trying to do is move the field forward an inch here. That's what you can do in a study. So I should be so lucky as to have moved an inch. And I hope that I've identified here areas that make someone say, is that true? Or I wonder if that's true with a bigger study. And I think that each of the pieces that I brought into this, that I emerged with, everything surprised me that I learned. And I wouldn't have picked tzedakah, for example, as something I would have thought would have been something that especially animated children. And I really look forward to seeing what someone else will say when they look at this. But I mean, I feel that the methodology is sound enough to look across. It's not just one case study, it's looking across 6. And in everywhere that I looked, I was looking for, what am I seeing predominate the discussion?
Right. And you do have, you are thinking about the kind of internal diversity within the Jewish community. You're not looking across the entire Jewish community, obviously, but there is some internal diversity and some geographic diversity. I want to circle back to this, you just mentioned the issue of tzedakah. So I want to circle back to that, which on the one hand is linked to action, right? Because tzedakah is a doing, but it comes up pretty strongly in the thesis, because it was there in the data. And so, for example, one of the teachers says, this is a quote from one of your colleagues. "I noticed that as soon as I said to do something Jewish, a mitzvah, the children immediately focused on giving money to the poor. To me, this reflects how giving tzedakah is already part of their developing Jewish identity." So that's a quote from a teacher who was noticing that, for at least in some settings, doing Jewish for the kids immediately brought them to this place of tzedakah. So even fairly young children were thinking, giving money in this paradigm, giving money is what it means to do Jewish. So how do you think about this link between Jewishness and tzedakah?
Well, I think in the study, we get hints that the act of giving tzedakah is one that's meaningful to children, and there's a lot of excitement around it. And that's what you hear from the teachers talking about it. And what I think is happening is that the children are noticing a lot of clues around them, that tzedakah is important. And the clues they're getting are environmental, developmental, relational, practical, they're related to rituals. And I want to just talk about a couple of those. So picture what's happening in the mind, what learning is happening, and what does it look like in the mind of the child. And I'm going to give you the words of one of these very smart teachers that I interviewed. The teacher said, "What's happening in the mind? You're constantly revisiting subject matter in different ways." I'm swirling my hands because, you're swirling. That's what's happening in the mind. You're making neural connections. And this process continues as the child approaches an idea from different angles. Every different modality offers a new lens to think about a topic more deeply and to circle back. So think of tzedakah. There's environmental clues. So some of the children in the study we realized that they notice that they see people who need money when they're in their strollers or on the subway coming to school. One child said, "If someone needs money, we give it to them. I saw somebody on the train who needed money." Okay, that's the environmental side. Similarly, in one school, the act of bringing food for individuals in the temple homeless shelter raises the prominence of the issue. Okay, so it's swirling some more. There's the domain of reasoning. This is what 3 children said in discussion. People need money to buy toys. Kids get that. If people don't have money, they would cry. So we have to give it to them. We have to raise money. And one child said, people need money if they don't have it. Okay, so they know. And there's a developmental factor at play. This is like what you said about the fluffy challah cover. Being taken care of is what these children know.
Yep.
So one child said, so they don't have anything to eat, so we give them something to eat and drink. Someone else said, we want them to have food because they need food. And this is what they're in the middle of. Developmentally, they're in the thick of a lifelong process of learning empathy. So like in one discussion that the children had about being kind, they say things like being kind means helping others or helping my brother be nice. Others said, I'm kind when I push Leia in the swing. I always say please or thank you, being people's friends. And one child said, if we kept the money, it wouldn't be nice. We should give it to people who need it. It would be nicer to give to people without money. So this whole question of what does it mean to be nice? What does it mean to be kind? And they're getting clues from their family. One child said, I like to give people what they need. It's one of my favorites. At home, I have baby clothes that I don't wear. So we're giving it away to be kind. And they're learning through the rituals. They're seeing the rituals really comes up in this study. So they're being asked to give tzedakah regularly in their class, in their Jewish school. And that's really important. Like kids are really noticing patterns and rituals, and they know that that means it's something important. there's a lot of more research on this. I think when I did more research to find out, like, how does this jive with other research on philanthropic giving, there's a lot of talk about how children that raising money and giving money with children should be more about intrinsic motivations, and it shouldn't be such a prescriptive moral education. And also, incredibly, there's research into children's charitable giving that says that beginning at this age, at a young age, rather than in the teen years, doubles the likelihood that this will become a habit in adulthood. And what's that about? I mean, is it just the enthusiasm? I mean, it's just like children really are wired to this. That's what we seem to be getting from this research. And I look forward to hearing what others have to say as they are looking close.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to think. I mean, you sort of casually used the term "children are wired." I don't think you mean that sort of the human species, but I do think if we think about our contemporary culture, our child raising habits, the language, the conversations that we have, the fact that children experience people taking care of them, and they may even at young age they are aware that not everybody has that, right? What we would now call an awareness of privilege, but they are aware that they in most cases, they actually have somebody taking care of them, but they know that not everybody gets what they need. And there are real moral theories at work that are being developed. And the wonderful contribution that you're making is one of the wonderful contributions that you're making is to say, this is actually a theory of Judaism. Like, these are very small children, but they very clearly see that this, whatever exactly it means, this is what Judaism teaches, or this is what Judaism is. Maybe not even teaches. This is what Judaism is, right? Giving tzedakah is what being Jewish is, I don't know, about, or how to enact it, something like that, which is really quite dramatic. I mean, we still operate in a context where a lot of folks assume that the children are ignorant and need to be taught a lot of things. But once we start listening in the way, Anna, that you listen to children and you pay attention to what they're actually saying, we realize they know a lot of stuff. There's a lot of material that we can work with as soon as we start to listen. We're almost out of time. We're running up against the time, so I want to circle back, and one of our members of our audience asked about the implications for early childhood educators and the work that they do, and obviously that's a huge question. But what do you think Jewish educators should learn from your work about children's theories about Judaism, and why does this research matter?
So first, I want to say with humility, I mean, this study is about learning from really smart educators already in the field, right? So sometimes maybe that's the lesson, is to elevate the voice of the teacher a little bit. But overall, I really think, and I think teachers do this, but I want us to all, those who sit in scholarly positions and in funding positions and in community organizing positions, just to really think about paying attention to children, to how they think and who they are. You reminded me, John, for any parent who's driven through the city and ever seen a homeless person, your kid mentions it in the car every time. You want the kid to stop asking, like, what are we going to do to help? But they're seeing things. They're unbelievably relational. So we want to pay attention to them. How do they think? Who they are? And I think we should ask ourselves, are we really doing that in Jewish education? Sure, we say that, but are we really doing that? And I believe that together with children as active partners, we will build Judaism. And I think that Judaism will be better for it. And to engage children as our partners, we really have to understand how they think. We have to get into this question of what are their theories? Just this conversation you and I had today. What's that about? Where's that coming from? And we need to promote pedagogies that make space for these kinds of really exciting investigations. And as you mentioned, the study offers the idea that children are bringing 3 theories into the classroom. And I want to lift that up for teachers. Teachers know this, right? The world is mine to make sense of. That's what the child is already coming with. I'm going to make sense of it together with you. And I'm going to do it using my whole self. And when you break these theories down and you teach according to these theories, then we're setting in motion this fourth theory in the minds of the children, the theory that I can make my mark on Judaism. And to me, that's an unbeatable outcome for Jewish early childhood education.
Thank you, Anna. So I think one of the key takeaways is really to think not just about the specifics of the theories that you uncovered, but also how would it change our pedagogy if we started to listen the way that you listen and that your colleagues, these wonderful colleagues on whom you relied, how they listen and how they document and how they pay attention to what these kids are saying and thinking. Anna, thank you. It's great to talk with you about your work. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I encourage you to check out the Mandel Center events page to learn about other upcoming events, as well as videos of prior events. I want to call your attention to our spotlight session coming up on Machloket, which will be on February 28th, with a terrific group of people with whom I will be talking about what Machloket looks like at its best and how we can foster a culture of principled disagreement. And then we have other sessions in our Learning About Learning series. March 15th, I'll be speaking with Professor Ilana Horowitz on the topic of what girls learn in Jewish families. Thank you all again for joining us. Be well.